Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport shuttle and stared at the massive space station before her. Kepler Station was bigger than any city she had ever seen on Earth. The structure stretched for kilometers in every direction, its metal surface gleaming under the light of 3 distant stars. She pulled her bag closer to her shoulder and walked toward the entrance. Other beings moved around her, but none looked human. Some had blue skin and tall, thin bodies. Others looked like walking rocks with 4 arms each. A few had skin that seemed to change colors as they moved. Elena had known this moment would come, but seeing it was different from reading about it. She was the first human to ever attend the Galactic Naval Academy, the first of her kind to study with species that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. The academy entrance was huge, with symbols carved into the walls that Elena could not read. A mechanical voice spoke in several languages before switching to English. "Welcome, Student Vasquez. Please proceed to Registration Hall 7. Elena followed the glowing arrows on the floor. The halls were wide enough for large groups, and the ceiling was so high she could barely see it. Everything felt designed for beings much bigger than humans. At the registration desk, a creature with 6 eyes and purple skin looked at her with curiosity. It spoke through a small device that translated its words into English. "You are the human," it said. "Not a question, but a statement." "Yes, I am," Elena replied. "Interesting. Your species is very young compared to the others here. You have only been in space for a few decades, correct?" Elena nodded. "That's right. The Zephyrians have been traveling space for over 10,000 years. The Taurians for 8,000. The Quantum Collective for 6,000. Your species, less than 100 years." The creature handed her a datapad and a small device. "This will translate most languages and help you navigate the station. Your first class begins tomorrow." Elena thanked the being and found her way to the student quarters. Her room was small but comfortable. Through the window, she could see dozens of ships coming and going from the station. Some were sleek and silver, others looked like floating crystals, and a few were massive and covered in thick armor plating. She unpacked her things and looked at her class schedule. Strategic Ship Design was her first course, taught by Professor Kethver, a famous Zephyrian admiral. Elena had read about him during her preparation. He had commanded fleets in 3 major wars and designed some of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. That evening, Elena went to the dining hall. The food was strange but edible. She sat alone at a small table and watched the other students. They moved in groups, separated by species. The Zephyrians sat together, their blue skin and tall frames making them easy to spot. The Taurians, who looked like walking rocks, gathered at tables built to support their weight. The Quantum Collective members seemed to shift between different forms as they ate. A few students glanced at her, but none approached. Elena had expected this. She was the outsider, the representative of a species barely out of its home system. The next morning, Elena arrived at her first class early. The classroom was circular with a holographic projector in the center. Students filed in, taking seats based on their species groups. Elena sat in the back, alone. Professor Kethver entered the room with graceful movements. He was tall, even for a Zephyrian, with pale blue skin and large, intelligent eyes. His voice was smooth and confident when he spoke. "Welcome to Strategic Ship Design. Today, we will examine the evolution of warship construction across our great civilizations." The holographic projector came to life, showing a massive warship rotating slowly in the air. The ship was beautiful, with smooth curves and elegant lines. Weapons were placed at perfect intervals along its hull, and its engines glowed with blue energy. "This is the Zephyrian Dreadnought class," Professor Kethver said with obvious pride. "It represents 5,000 years of design evolution. Every line, every curve, Every weapon placement has been perfected through countless battles and improvements. The students nodded appreciatively. Elena studied the ship carefully, her engineering background from Earth's Naval Academy helping her understand the design. The hologram changed to show a Taurian warship. This one was bulkier, covered in thick armor plates and bristling with heavy weapons. It looked like a flying fortress. The Taurian battlecruiser, Professor Kethver, continued, built for honor and direct combat. Their ships reflect their warrior culture in every detail. Next came a ship from the Quantum Collective. This one seemed to shift and change as Elena watched, its surface appearing to flow like liquid metal. Weapons appeared and disappeared along its hull. The Quantum Adaptive Destroyer. Technology so advanced that the ship can reshape itself during battle. Elena raised her hands slowly. Professor Kethver noticed and gestured for her to speak. "I have a question about the design principles," she said. The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to her, and Elena felt her cheeks grow warm. "Please, ask your question," Professor Kethver said. Elena stood up, looking at the three ship designs still rotating in the hologram. She had noticed something that bothered her, something that went against everything she had learned about ship design on Earth. "These are all beautiful ships," she said carefully, "but I'm curious about some of the design choices." "What specifically?" Professor Kethver asked. Elena pointed at the holographic ships. "Why are your warships missing plating here and here?" The classroom became completely silent. Elena had pointed to several spots on each ship where the armor plating had gaps or joints that seemed vulnerable. From her Earth naval training, these looked like critical weak points. Professor Kethver's expression changed slightly. The other students turned to look at each other with confusion. "Missing plating?" he asked. "The structural joints around the weapon mounts," Elena continued, feeling more confident. "And here, where the engine connections meet the main hull. On Earth, we learned that these points need extra protection because they're natural weak spots." A Taurian student, larger than the others, made a noise that sounded like rocks grinding together. His translator converted it to words. The human question's designs perfected over millennia. Elena felt her face grow hot, but she pressed on. "I'm not questioning the overall designs. I'm just wondering about the engineering reasoning behind leaving these areas exposed." Professor Kethver studied the holograms with new attention. For several long moments, nobody spoke. "These designs," he said slowly, "have been refined through thousands of years of experience. Every aspect has been tested in real combat." "I understand that," Elena replied. "But from a structural engineering perspective, these gaps create stress concentration points that could fail under focused fire." The silence in the room grew heavier. Elena realized she might have made a serious mistake. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Elena could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as every student in the classroom stared at her. She had clearly said something wrong, but she couldn't understand what. Professor Kethver's tall frame seemed to stiffen as he looked at the holographic ships floating in the center of the room. His large eyes moved from one design to another, studying the areas Elena had pointed out. "Student Vasquez," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "These designs have been used successfully in hundreds of battles across thousands of years. Perhaps human understanding of space warfare is limited." A few students made sounds that Elena's translator identified as laughter. The Taurian student who had spoken before, whose name tag read Breakter, spoke again. "The human has been in space for less than a century," he said, his rocky voice full of mockery. "We have fought wars among the stars since before her species discovered fire." Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but something inside her refused to back down. Her grandfather had been a naval engineer, and her father had served on submarines. The Vasquez family had been building and fixing ships for generations. She knew what she was seeing. "I understand that you have much more experience," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But structural engineering principles don't change just because you're in space instead of water." Professor Kethfer raised a scaled hand for silence. "Explain what you mean." Elena moved closer to the holographic display, pointing at the Zephyrian dreadnought. "Look at this weapon mount here. The armor plating stops just short of the mounting ring. That creates a weak point where stress from the weapon's recoil will concentrate." She moved to the Taurian ship. "And here, where the main engine attaches to the hull, there's a gap in the armor plating around the connection point. A direct hit there would separate the engine from the ship." Finally, she pointed at the quantum collective vessel. "This one is harder to see because it shifts, but when the armor flows away from certain areas, it leaves the underlying structure exposed." A quantum collective student, whose form seemed to flicker between solid and translucent, spoke up. "Our ships can adapt their armor thickness in real time. The design is perfect, but adaptation takes time," Elena replied. "Even if it's just microseconds, a focused attack on these points during the transition could cause catastrophic damage." Professor Kethfer studied Elena with new interest. "You speak of focused attacks on specific weak points. This suggests tactical knowledge that seems advanced for a species so new to space warfare." Elena nodded. "On Earth, naval battles have been fought for thousands of years. We've learned that every ship has weak points, and the side that finds and exploits them first usually wins." She pulled out her datapad and called up some images from Earth's naval history. "Look at this submarine from Earth's 20th century. See how the pressure hull is reinforced at every joint and connection point? And this battleship, the armor plating overlaps at every seam to prevent weak spots." The alien students leaned forward to look at the primitive Earth vessels. To them, the ships looked crude and basic, but Elena could see understanding starting to appear in their expressions. "Your warships are beautiful and much more advanced than anything we have on Earth," Elena continued. "But they seem to prioritize aesthetics over structural integrity in some areas." A Zephyrian student with darker blue skin spoke for the first time. "Aesthetics are important. A warship must inspire fear in enemies and confidence in allies. Beautiful ships accomplish both." "I agree that appearance matters," Elena said. "But a beautiful ship that gets destroyed because of poor structural design won't inspire anyone." Professor Kethfer was quiet for a long moment, studying the holographic displays with new eyes. Elena watched as his gaze moved from ship to ship, focusing on the areas she had identified. "These design elements you question," he said slowly. "They are traditional. They have been part of our shipbuilding culture for millennia. The gaps you see are intentional. They allow for easier maintenance access and weapon replacement." "That makes sense," Elena replied. "But couldn't you achieve this same accessibility with retractable armor panels or reinforced maintenance hatches?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Elena realized she was essentially suggesting that entire galactic civilizations had been building their warships wrong for thousands of years. Breaktor. The Taurian made a sound like boulders crushing together. "The humans suggest that our greatest shipbuilders, our most honored engineers, have been fools for millennia." "No," Elena said quickly. "I'm not saying anyone was foolish. I'm just saying that different perspectives can sometimes reveal new possibilities." She looked around the room at the alien faces staring at her. "On Earth, we have a saying, fresh eyes see things differently. Maybe because humans are new to space warfare, we notice things that others might overlook because they've always been there." Professor Kethfer walked closer to the holographic display, his movements more thoughtful than before. "Show me," he said quietly. "Show me how you would modify these designs." Elena's hand shook slightly as she approached the controls. "I don't want to offend anyone, These ships are incredible achievements. You have already asked the questions, Professor Kethver said. Now show us your answers. Elena began modifying the holographic Zephyrian ship, adding armor panels over the weapon mount joints and reinforcing the connection points. She worked carefully, trying to maintain the ship's elegant appearance while addressing the structural issues. As she worked, the classroom remained silent. She could feel everyone watching her every move, judging her modifications to ships that represented thousands of years of their civilization's knowledge. When she finished with the Zephyrian ship, it still looked graceful and beautiful, but now every joint was protected and every connection point reinforced. The changes were subtle but significant. This maintains the original aesthetic while eliminating the structural weak points, Elena explained. The modifications would add maybe 5% to the ship's mass, but could improve survivability significantly. Professor Kethver studied the modified design for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Class is dismissed. Student Vasquez, please remain. The other students filed out, many of them speaking in their native languages. Elena caught fragments through her translator, words like presumptuous, ignorant, and disrespectful. When they were alone, Professor Kethver approached Elena. His expression was unreadable. What you have suggested today, he said carefully, if true, would mean that we have been building flawed warships for millennia. Do you understand the implications of such a claim? Elena nodded, her throat dry. I think so. It would mean that countless ships have been lost unnecessarily. Countless lives wasted because of design flaws we failed to recognize. Professor, I didn't mean to. You meant to learn, he interrupted. And in doing so, you may have taught us something we desperately needed to know. He paused, looking at the modified ship still floating in the hologram. I want you to prepare a detailed analysis of all standard galactic warship designs, focusing on structural vulnerabilities. Can you do this? Elena's heart raced. Yes, sir. I can do that. Good, because if you are right, Student Vasquez, you may have just changed the future of warfare in our galaxy. Elena spent the next 3 days buried in the Academy's vast digital archives. The library was a massive chamber filled with floating data crystals and holographic displays. She worked at a small terminal in the corner, trying to stay out of everyone's way. The other students avoided her now. Word had spread quickly about the human who questioned the galaxy's greatest warship designs. Elena caught them staring and whispering when they thought she wasn't looking. She didn't care. What she was finding in the battle reports was far more disturbing than social isolation. The first report she studied was from a battle between the Zephyrians and a pirate fleet 20 years ago. The Zephyrian cruiser Star's Edge had been destroyed when a single missile hit the junction between its main weapon and the hull. The explosion had caused a cascade failure that tore the ship apart. Elena cross-referenced the ship's design with the hologram from class. The missile had hit exactly the kind of unprotected structural joint she had identified. The second report was worse. During the Taurian-Kethrak conflict 15 years ago, an entire squadron of Taurian heavy cruisers had been crippled when enemy fighters targeted the exposed connection points between their engines and main hulls. 7 ships lost in minutes because of precision strikes on vulnerable areas. Elena pulled up the designs of those ships. Everyone had the same weakness she had spotted in Professor Kethvar's class. By the end of the first day, Elena had found dozens of similar cases. Ships destroyed by hits to structural weak points that could have been protected with simple design changes. On the second day, she began analyzing the patterns. The more she studied, the more horrified she became. It wasn't just individual ships, entire battle. Tactics across the galaxy seemed designed around exploiting these structural vulnerabilities. Elena found reports of battles where fleets would focus fire on weapon mount junctions, engine connections, and sensor array attachment points. What she had thought were random weak spots were actually known targets that experienced commanders aimed for. The galaxy's military leaders knew about these vulnerabilities. They just accepted them as normal parts of warfare. On the third day, Elena started doing calculations. She took the specifications for standard galactic warships and ran stress analysis using principles she had learned at Earth's Naval Academy. The results made her hands shake. A Zephyrian dreadnought could lose 30% of its structural integrity from a single hit to the right junction point. A Taurian battlecruiser could be completely disabled by severing its engine connections. The Quantum Collective ships were even worse. Their adaptive armor actually created more weak points during transitions. Elena stared at her calculations in disbelief. These civilizations had been building glass cannons for thousands of years, and everyone just accepted it as the way things were supposed to be. She began designing solutions. Simple reinforcement techniques that Earth had used on submarines could be adapted for space. Overlapping armor plates instead of edge-to-edge joints. Redundant connection points for critical systems. Stress distribution frameworks to spread impact forces. The modifications weren't revolutionary. They were basic engineering principles that humans had developed over centuries of trial and error. On the fourth day, Professor Kethver found her in the library. He approached her terminal quietly, looking at the screens full of data and calculations. "Student Vasquez," he said, "have you been here for 3 days straight?" Elena looked up, realizing she had lost track of time. "I think so." The data was concerning. Professor Kethver's expression grew serious. "Show me what you have found." Elena began pulling up her analysis. She showed him the battle reports, the casualty statistics, the structural calculations. Professor Kethver grew more silent with each new piece of evidence. "According to my calculations," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you could increase average fleet survival rates by 400% with relatively simple design modifications." Professor Kethver stared at the numbers. 400%? The structural weak points are so consistent across all galactic designs that they create predictable failure modes. Enemy commanders target these areas because they know exactly where to hit for maximum damage. Elena pulled up a holographic display showing a typical fleet engagement. "Watch this battle from the Sector 7 conflict. See how the attacking force concentrates fire on specific points on each ship? They're not randomly shooting. They're targeting the structural vulnerabilities." Professor Kethver watched the battle replay in slow motion. Elena could see understanding dawning in his large eyes. "Every hit is deliberate," he murmured. "They know exactly where to strike." "It's become part of standard tactical doctrine," Elena confirmed. "The weak points are so well known that military academies probably teach targeting protocols for them." Elena brought up another screen showing her proposed modifications. These changes would eliminate most of the vulnerable points while maintaining combat effectiveness. Some modifications would even improve performance by distributing structural loads more efficiently. Professor Kethver studied the redesigned ships. The changes looked minor, but Elena could see him understanding their significance. "The aesthetic impact is minimal," Elena continued. "The ships would still look beautiful and imposing, but they would be much harder to destroy." Professor Kethver was quiet for a long time, studying the data. Finally, he spoke. "Student Vasquez, what you have discovered here. It challenges everything we thought we knew about warship design." "I'm sorry if I've overstepped," Elena said quickly. "No," Professor Kethver replied firmly. "You have done exactly what a good engineer should do. You questioned assumptions and tested them against evidence." He paused, looking at the holographic displays showing thousands of years of galactic warfare. "Do you realize what this means?" He asked. Elena nodded slowly. It means that thousands of ships and millions of lives have been lost unnecessarily. All because nobody questioned design traditions that prioritized appearance over function. It means, Professor Kethver said quietly, that your species, despite being the newest to space warfare, may understand it better than civilizations that have fought among the stars for millennia. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What happens now? Professor Kethver began gathering her data files. Now we present this to the Academy Board. They will need to verify your findings independently. And if they confirm what I found, Professor Kethver looked at her with an expression that mixed respect with something that might have been fear. Then we send this information to every major fleet command in the galaxy. Because if you are right, Student Vasquez, every warship currently in service is a potential death trap waiting to be exploited. Elena watched as he copied her files to a secure drive. She had started with a simple question about missing armor plating. Now she was potentially exposing a flaw that could reshape galactic military doctrine. Professor, she said quietly, what if the other species don't want to listen? What if they think humans are trying to interfere with their military traditions? Professor Kethver smiled, the first time Elena had seen him do so. Then they will learn the hard way that tradition without questioning leads to stagnation. And stagnation in warfare leads to death. He stood to leave, then paused. Student Vasquez, you may have just given the galaxy the greatest gift in its military history, the gift of seeing our own blindness. The Academy Board meeting was the most tense gathering Elena had ever witnessed. Representatives from every major galactic civilization sat around a circular table in the station's central conference room. The air felt thick with skepticism and barely controlled anger. Admiral Detmer, a massive Taurian with scarred rock skin, spoke first. His voice rumbled like distant thunder through the translator. We are here because a human student, a member of a species that has barely left its home system, claims our warships are fundamentally flawed. He paused. His forearms crossed in a gesture of obvious displeasure. This is either remarkable insight or spectacular arrogance. Admiral Zixara of the Quantum Collective flickered between different forms as she spoke. The human's calculations appear mathematically sound, but mathematics alone does not account for real-world combat variables. Fleet Commander Yheliolan, a Zephyrian even taller than Professor Kethver, remained neutral in tone. The evidence Student Vasquez has compiled is extensive. The correlation between structural weak points and ship losses is concerning. Elena sat at a small table to one side, feeling very young and very human among these legendary military leaders. Her hands were sweating as she waited for their decision. The only way to resolve this dispute, Admiral Detmer declared, is through practical demonstration. Professor Kethver leaned forward. What do you propose? A combat simulation, Fleet Commander Etholan replied. 2 identical fleets in mock battle. One using standard galactic designs, the other modified according to Student Vasquez's recommendations. Admiral Zixar's form solidified into something resembling agreement. The Academy's combat simulators can provide completely realistic conditions without risking actual ships or lives. Very well, Admiral Detmer said. But the human herself must design the modifications and explain the tactical implications. If she claims to understand our weaknesses, let her prove it. Elena's throat went dry, but she nodded. I accept. The next week passed in a blur of frantic activity. Elena worked with teams of engineers from each species to modify holographic ship designs according to her principles. The changes were subtle but systematic, reinforced joint covers, overlapping armor plates, redundant connection points, and stress distribution frameworks dot the modified Zephyrian. Ships kept their elegant curves but gained protected weapon mounts and armored engine connections. The Taurian vessels maintained their imposing bulk while eliminating vulnerable structural joints. The Quantum Collective ships received adaptive armor that could protect weak points even during transitions. Elena also had to explain human tactical doctrines to the simulation programmers. Earth's naval warfare had evolved around the principle of finding and exploiting enemy weak points while protecting your own. It was a concept that seemed foreign to galactic military thinking. The day of the simulation arrived. The Academy's main auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and observers from fleet commands across the galaxy. Elena sat in the front row, trying to control her nervousness. The simulation would pit two fleets of equal size and composition against each other. Fleet Alpha used standard galactic designs and tactics. Fleet Beta used Elena's modifications and human-inspired targeting protocols. Admiral Dagmar stood at the central podium. Begin simulation. The holographic display showed two fleets approaching each other across empty space. Fleet Alpha moved in traditional formation, elegant and symmetrical, designed to showcase the power and beauty of galactic warships. Fleet Beta's formation looked more utilitarian. Ships positioned to protect each other's weak points, with overlapping fields of fire focused on specific targeting solutions. The first exchange of fire looked normal. Beams and missiles crossed space between the fleets, and both sides took hits. The audience watched as damage indicators appeared on various ships, but then something started to go wrong for Fleet Alpha. Elena watched as Fleet Beta's weapons found their targets with surgical precision. Instead of spreading fire across entire ships, they concentrated on specific points: weapon mounts, engine connections, sensor arrays. The exact vulnerabilities Elena had identified. Impossible, Admiral Zixara whispered, her form flickering rapidly. Fleet Alpha's ships began suffering catastrophic failures. A Zephyrian cruiser lost its main weapons when a focused strike severed the weapon mount connections. A Taurian dreadnought went dead in space when its engines were separated from the hull. A Quantum Collective destroyer simply broke apart when its adaptive systems failed during a structural transition. Meanwhile, Fleet Beta's modified ships absorbed incredible punishment. Their reinforced design spread impact forces and protected critical systems. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. This is not possible, Admiral Dagmar growled. The simulation must be flawed. Professor Kethfer checked the simulation parameters. All systems are operating normally. The only variables are ship design and tactical doctrine. Elena watched in fascination and growing horror as Fleet Alpha was systematically destroyed. It wasn't even close. Ships that have been considered invincible were being taken apart piece by piece by an enemy that knew exactly where to strike. The simulation ended with Fleet Alpha completely defeated, and Fleet Beta having lost only 3 ships. The auditorium fell silent. Fleet Commander Ethelyn spoke first, his voice barely audible. Run it again. Different scenario, different starting positions. They ran the simulation 5 more times with different variables each time. The results were consistent. Fleet Beta achieved decisive victory in every engagement, often with minimal losses. The targeting efficiency is extraordinary, Professor Kethfer observed. Fleet Beta identifies and exploits structural weaknesses with precision we have never seen. Because they know exactly where to look, Elena said quietly, standing up. Earth naval doctrine has always focused on finding weak points. When your ship designs have consistent vulnerabilities, it becomes predictable. Admiral Dagmar's rocky face showed something like shock. You are saying that human tactical thinking is naturally suited to exploiting our design flaws. I'm saying that humans develop different solutions to the same problems you faced, Elena replied. We just approach ship design from a different perspective. Admiral Zixara materialized into a more solid form. The simulation suggests that current galactic fleet doctrine is obsolete. If an enemy understands these vulnerabilities, any conflict would become a massacre. Fleet Commander Itholan finished. Ships designed over millennia would be helpless against opponents using these targeting methods. Elena felt the weight of every eye in the auditorium. The simulations show what could happen, but they also show what we could prevent with proper design modifications. The modifications work, Professor Kethver confirmed, studying the data. The reinforced designs show 400% improvement in survival rates, exactly as Student Vasquez calculated. Admiral Lekmer stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the room. Student Vasquez, do you understand what you have done here? Elena nodded, her voice small. I think so. You have demonstrated that every warship currently in service across our galaxy is potentially obsolete. You have shown that our military doctrines are based on flawed assumptions. You have proven that a species barely out of its home system understands warfare better than civilizations with thousands of years of experience. The silence stretched on, and Admiral Lekmer continued, You have given us the tools to fix it. Fleet Commander Itholan stepped forward. Student Vasquez, would you be willing to work with our engineering teams to develop new design standards? Elena looked around the room at the faces of beings from across the galaxy. Fear, respect, and something else. Hope. Yes, she said. I would be honored to help. 6 months later, Elena stood in the main engineering bay of Kepler Station, watching history being made. Around her, teams of engineers from every galactic civilization worked together on a single project. Zephyrians shared their elegant design principles with Taurians, who offered their knowledge of heavy armor systems. Quantum collective technicians explained adaptive materials to human. Engineers who contributed practical structural solutions dotted. Was the first truly collaborative warship design in galactic history. The stress distribution looks good, said Kira, a young Zephyrian engineer who had become one of Elena's closest friends. Your reinforcement framework spreads impact forces exactly as calculated. Elena nodded, studying the holographic ship rotating before them. The design was beautiful. It maintained the aesthetic grace that galactic civilizations prized while incorporating the structural integrity principles that humans understood. The engine connections are perfect, rumbled Thok, a Taurian engineer whose rocky exterior had a brilliant understanding of power systems. Triple redundancy with armored housings. This ship will not lose propulsion from a single hit. Zara, whose quantum collective form flickered as she worked, added her analysis. The adaptive armor can now protect critical points during transitions. The weak spots that existed in our old designs are completely eliminated. Elena smiled as she watched her former classmates work together. The same students who had mocked her questions 6 months ago were now her eager collaborators. Word of the simulation results had spread throughout the academy and beyond. Everyone wanted to understand these new design principles, but the changes went far beyond. Ship design Professor Kethver approached the group, carrying a datapad with the latest reports from fleet commands across the galaxy. The preliminary refit results are remarkable, he announced. Ships modified with Elena's principles show 60% fewer casualties in combat exercises. What about resistance from traditional commanders? Elena asked. This had been her biggest worry, that military leaders would reject changes to designs they had used for millennia. Less than expected, Professor Kethver replied. The simulation demonstrations were very convincing. No commander wants to send crews into battle with ships they know are vulnerable. Admiral Lekmer had become an unexpected ally. After the simulations, he had returned to Taurian space and immediately ordered modifications to his entire fleet. The changes had been so successful, that other Taurian commanders began requesting the same upgrades. There has been one unexpected development, Professor Kethver continued. Several species have requested that humans be assigned as advisors to their fleet design teams. Elena looked up in surprise. Really? The Zephyrian Defense Council wants human engineers to review their new patrol ship designs. The Quantum Collective has asked for consultation on their adaptive armor systems. Even the isolated Kethric Empire has sent unofficial inquiries about structural engineering principles. Elena felt a mixture of pride and bewilderment. 6 months ago, she had been the outsider asking uncomfortable questions. Now human engineering knowledge was being sought across the galaxy. It makes sense, Kira said. Humans developed their shipbuilding knowledge through different challenges than ours. You solve problems we never realized we had. What problems did humans face that we didn't? Thok asked, genuinely curious. Elena thought about Earth's naval history. Centuries of ships sinking in storms. Battles won and lost based on structural integrity. The constant fight against hostile environments. Earth's oceans are dangerous, she explained. Ships that couldn't handle stress from waves and weather didn't survive long enough to fight battles. We had to build ships that were structurally sound first, then add weapons and armor. While we built our ships in space, Zara observed, where the only stress comes from combat. So we optimized for firepower and appearance rather than structural integrity. Different environments, different solutions, Professor Kethver agreed. The galaxy is better for having multiple perspectives. Elena looked at the ship design floating before them. It represented more than just improved. Engineering, it symbolized what could be accomplished when different civilizations combined their knowledge instead of competing. The ship was designated the Unity-class cruiser, and it would be the first vessel jointly built by all galactic civilizations. Zephyrian aesthetic sensibilities, Taurian structural knowledge, quantum collective adaptive technology, and human engineering principles all integrated into a single design. When will the first ship be completed? Elena asked. Construction begins next month, Professor Kethver replied. The maiden voyage will be in 1 year. Elena tried to imagine that moment. The first warship that truly represented the combined knowledge of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. It would be more than just a ship. It would be proof that cooperation could achieve things that no single species could accomplish. Alone. Her communicator chimed with an incoming message. Elena checked the display and saw it was from Admiral Chun, commander of Earth's small deep space fleet. Elena, the message read, we've received requests from 17 different galactic civilizations asking for human engineering consultants. The Earth Naval Academy is creating a new galactic engineering program, and we'd like you to help design the curriculum. Congratulations, you've made humanity valuable to the galaxy. Elena stared at the message in amazement. When she had left Earth to attend the Galactic Naval Academy, humanity had been the new species trying to learn from older, more advanced civilizations. Now those same civilizations were asking to learn from humans. Good news? Kira asked, noticing Elena's expression. Very good news, Elena replied. She showed the message to her friends, who reacted with enthusiasm and congratulations. This is how it should be, Professor Kethver said. Every species contributing their unique knowledge and perspective. The galaxy becomes stronger when we share our discoveries. Instead of hoarding them, Elena looked around the engineering. They had beings from across the galaxy working together on problems that had seemed impossible to solve alone. Zephyrians and Taurians collaborated on armor systems. Quantum Collective members shared their technology with human engineers. Former enemies worked side by side. Professor, she said, I have a confession to make. Oh? When I first asked about the missing armor plating, I was just confused. I didn't understand why advanced civilizations would leave obvious weak points unprotected. I wasn't trying to revolutionize galactic warfare. Professor Cuthbert smiled. The best discoveries are often made by people who ask innocent questions that others are too experienced to consider. Sometimes. Thok added with what Elena had learned was the Taurian equivalent of a chuckle. Being new to a problem is an advantage. Experienced engineers might assume certain things are impossible or unnecessary. Elena looked at the Unity-class cruiser design one more time. It was beautiful, powerful, and structurally sound. More importantly, it represented a new era of cooperation and shared knowledge. What will you do when the exchange program ends? Zara asked. Elena had been dreading this question. Her year at the Galactic Naval Academy was almost over, and she was supposed to return to Earth soon. Actually, Professor Cuthbert said, the Academy Board has made a proposal. They would like Elena to stay as a permanent instructor, teaching a new course called Alternative Engineering Perspectives. Alana's heart jumped. Really? The goal is to encourage students from all species to question assumptions and think beyond traditional approaches. Who better to teach that than the person who demonstrated its value? Elena looked at her friends and colleagues. At the engineering bay full of collaborative projects. At the ship design that represented everything she had hoped to achieve. I accept, she said. As the others celebrated. Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had started with a simple question about missing armor plating and discovered that sometimes the most profound changes come from the most innocent observations. The galaxy was vast and full of ancient wisdom, but it also had room for fresh perspectives and new ideas. Elena had learned that being different wasn't a disadvantage. It was exactly what made her valuable. And somewhere in space, fleets were being rebuilt with stronger, safer designs that would protect the lives of crews for generations to come. All because a human student had been naive enough to ask why things were done a certain way. Elena smiled and got back to work. There were still plenty of questions to ask and problems to solve.